Greetings to you in the name of Yawasha, the Hashwar Hebrew name for Jesus. I'm Michael Hoshaya, and I'm with you today to continue in the series Revelation in Light of Daniel with Part 5, Persia, the Bear. We just learned in the previous videos how Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. We've identified the precious metals on the statue of the dream that he had. And we've also shown that here in Daniel chapter 7 that his vision showed first a lion who had wings, then the wings were plucked, and he was made to stand up like a man. We learned how that was identified as Nebuchadnezzar. Now, in the previous video, we said goodbye to Nebuchadnezzar. That's justified because the kingdom of Babylon is over with. We now move on to the second part of Daniel's vision, which we see here a picture of King Cyrus, the Persian king who led the Medo-Persian Empire to defeat Babylon and then took over that empire. This is King Cyrus. He was a good king. You will remember from reading in Daniel where the exilic period of Israel was done away with, and this is the man who let the people go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the wall and to rebuild the temple. This is the king who did so. So without further ado, we're going to take a look at our little chart here. And here it is, the statue that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed about. And here it is that Babylon was mentioned as the lion with wings. And here it is that we see the bear and Medo-Persia, silver arms. What we're going to do is we're going to see that in Scripture, and then we're going to learn a little bit more about those ribs in that bear's mouth. So let's go take a look at Daniel chapter 7, and we're going to verse 5. And behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise and devour much flesh. This bear is none other than the Medo-Persian Empire. The bear itself is King Cyrus, and the 3 ribs in its mouth are 3 succeeding kings that came after him. Now, there were many kings within this time frame here of Medo-Persia's empire, but there were only 4 notable ones. We know one was King Cyrus himself. So we're going to learn. How do we know that these 3 ribs, let's go ahead and look at that line where it says, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side. You'll remember that in Daniel, we read about a ram who had 2 horns, but one horn was larger than the other. And here it is, then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. We learned that the Medo-Persian Empire was a combination of Persia and Medes. And so the Median Empire, who was ruled by King Cyrus's grandfather, came first. But King Cyrus rose up against his grandfather, killed him, and mingled the Median Empire with his, because now, since he came up after Astyages, his grandfather, and after the kingdom of the Medes, he grew stronger, and this is why the horn that came up last was taller, because it was stronger and greater. This is what we learned about the Medo-Persian Empire. And here it is that we are seeing in Daniel chapter 5, and it raised up itself on one side. This is signifying and identifying to the ram in chapter 8 and to the dream in chapter 2 of the silver arms and chest that King Cyrus and Medo-Persia came to defeat Babylon. And here it is identified as a bear in Daniel's vision. So how do we know that the three ribs in the mouth, and it had three ribs in its mouth, how do we know that those are following kings? Well, I made the claim, so now I have to prove it to you. Let's go to Daniel chapter 11 and we're going to begin in, verse 1 and go to verse 2. And I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now I will show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. This is how we know that those ribs in the bear's mouth are 3 succeeding kings. I'm going to give you a little bit of history on these kings. First off, I'm going to tell you that there were several kings that came after King Cyrus, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you the names of these. After Cyrus the Great, 559 to 530 BC, Cambyses II, 530 BC to 522 BC. Then you had one named Bardia in 522 BC. Unfortunately for Bardia, he didn't last long. Darius I came in from 522 to 486 BC. Then we had Xerxes I, 485 to 465 BC. And this is where the decline of the empire begins. Then you have Artaxerxes I from 465 to 424. Then you had Xerxes II in 424 BC. Unfortunately, he was killed by a guy named Sogdianus. And then another king came in. We're not sure of his name. We know he existed, but we're not sure of his name. And he lasted from 424 to 423. He was killed by Darius II. And Darius II ruled from 424 to 404. Artaxerxes II ruled from 404 to 358. Artaxerxes III ruled from 358 to 338. Artaxerxes IV reigned from 338 to 336. And all of these were killed. Darius III came in at 336 to 330 BC. He was killed either by Artaxerxes V or Alexander the Great. We are not sure. However, what we are sure of is that there were 4 notable kings as mentioned in the Bible. And these kings were notable because of the things that they did. And throughout history, we learn that of all the kings who came through to rule in the Medo-Persian Empire. However, we do know that under Cyrus's rule, which extended from North Africa to Southeast Europe, we understood that the Persians governed an area as large as the continental United States. There were many kings of Persia from the time of Cyrus. However, only 4 notable kings are mentioned. Now, we know that King Cyrus was the first notable king, and I'm going to mention the other 3. This is debatable, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to identify these 3 as the notable ones by their actions. And the first was Darius I from 522 to 486, also known as Darius Hystaspes, or the Great, was both extremely cruel and generous. Darius seized power following the death of Cambyses II, son of Cyrus. Being only a cousin of Cambyses, Darius emphasized his royal ancestry, but his rule was not recognized in all provinces, and he endured numerous revolts. He made 2 attempts to invade mainland Greece. The first was stopped by a storm in the Aegean, and the second came within 20 miles of Athens. The Athenians defeated him at Marathon in 490 BC, stopping westward expansion. This by way of the Holman Illustrated Bible Dictionary, 2004. The next is Xerxes I. This is an interesting one because you've already read about this guy and possibly did not know it. Xerxes I, who ruled from 486 to 464 BC, is also known as Ahasuerus in the book of Esther. He is the one who married Esther. Esther was the one who stopped the persecution of her people, the Jews, at the time by one of Xerxes' main guys, and ultimately saved the people. And this is where we get the Jewish celebration of Purim. So, without further ado, he was the son of Darius the Great and grandson of Cyrus the Great. He campaigned militarily against the Greeks, avenging the loss at Marathon in 490 BC. This by way of the Holman Illustrated Bible Dictionary, 2004. Xerxes I launched an invasion overland through Thrace and Macedonia. At first successful, the Persians destroyed a brave Spartan force defending the pass at Thermopylae. You may remember this by the movie 300. Remember Leonidas? This is Sparta. And he kicks the Persian into the hole. This is the battle that they're talking about. And marched to Athens. But a Greek fleet defeated the Persian navy at Salamis in 480 BC. And Greek heavy infantry, Hoplites, crushed the Persian army at Plataea in 479 BC, ending the threat to the mainland. This by way of the New York Times Guide to Essential Knowledge. Then we have Darius III, ruled the Persian Empire from 336 to 330 BC. Now, you remember that we learned that the Empire of Greece would come against the Persian Empire and defeat it. This was the guy who ultimately, and is firmly believed by historians and theologians alike, to have lost to Alexander. But what's interesting about this is I need you to remember that year 336 BC, because this is also when Alexander the Great came into power as well. So it seems ordained by God that they should meet each other in battle while both were leaders. Notice how God brought both of these men to power in the very same year. We're going to learn about that in Greece as well. Darius was defeated by Alexander at Issus in 333 BC and again in 331 BC. It is at this point where scholars agree that the Persian Empire came to its end in 330 BC when Darius III was killed, and is where scholars and historians also split apart, with some believing that Alexander the Great killed him, or Artaxerxes V, who wanted to be a king, killed him. But either way, Darius III died, and everyone agrees this is where the Persian Empire died as well. Artaxerxes V tried to come up against Alexander the Great, but it was considered nothing more than a revolt. Really, it really wasn't a battle or a war, because Alexander killed Artaxerxes V, and that was ultimately and clearly, point blank, the end of the Persian Empire. So here it is that we've learned that in Daniel chapter 5, Daniel chapter 7, verse 5. And behold, another beast, a second like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, referenced to Daniel chapter 8, the ram. And it had 3 ribs in its mouth, which we just discussed, those 3 that came after King Cyrus and their notable deeds. And we also learned that one of them was Ahasuerus, who was married to Esther. It was found among the archaeological work of this area when they learned about King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, that there were documents or recorded events and plans, strategies against Greece, which would begin for us in our knowledge and history at Thermopylae, when he fought the Spartans and went up against 300 soldiers, suffered major defeats in the many battles that came after, and ultimately walked through Sparta and was on his way up to Athens, but nonetheless was defeated. So we've learned that the 3 ribs in his mouth were notable kings by their deeds. The first being King Cyrus, the last being Darius III. And the next video we're staging for is part 6, which we will talk about Alexander the Great and those wonderful 4 horns that we read about in Daniel chapter 8. We'll touch on that next time. I thank you for your time. I hope you've enjoyed this and learned something. And until we get to the next video, have a good day.